welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Perez coming to you from Baltimore. Amid shouting protesters outside, a meeting of the leaders of Germany, Russia, France, and Ukraine took place on Wednesday in Berlin. They attempted to restart negotiations over Ukraine. Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko said a roadmap towards a ceasefire had been agreed upon and would be adopted by the end of November. The issues at stake in the roadmap include Ukraine's control of its borders with Russia and Ukraine's ongoing responses to pro-Russian separatists and passing laws for local elections in disputed territory. Though France and Germany helped to broker the so-called Minsk Agreement in 2015 to end large-scale conflicts between Ukrainian forces and the separatists, the fighting has continued. Nearly 10,000 people have died in the conflict since it began in April of 2014. Joining us now to speak about the renewed peace talks and what obstacles still lie in the way of the roadmap to complete a ceasefire is Ray McGovern. Ray McGovern leads the Speaking to Truth to Power section of Tell the World, a publishing arm of the Ecumenical Church of the Savior in Inner City, Washington. He's a retired CIA officer and was employed under 7 U.S. presidents for over 27 years. He presented the morning intelligence briefings at the White House under President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Ray, so good to have you back after a while.
Thank you.
So, Ray, you were recently in the region. So give us some context as to whether you think this four-way meeting in Berlin is a sign that's positive in terms of resolving the conflict and de-escalating it to begin with.
Well, I wish I could give you good news, Sharmini, but I cannot in good conscience. Nothing happened. The only good thing about these negotiations is that the United States is excluded. This is called the Normandy Four, the Minsk Agreement, and it's the Russians, the French, the British, and of course the Ukrainians. Now, the Russians and the French and the British would like to tamp down the violence in Ukraine. They'd like to end this feckless slaughter of people in the eastern provinces, but it all depends on, number one, Poroshenko, the head of Ukraine, and number two, whether he's his own man. Now, subhead number two, he's not his own man. The U.S. has him on strings, and subhead number B, if you will, even if he said to his forces, who are led to a large degree by proto-fascists, even if he said, knock it off, stop the violence in the eastern part of Ukraine, there's no guarantee that they would do it. So what's necessary here? Well, what Minsk agreed upon was a ceasefire and also a degree of regional autonomy for the people in Lugansk and the other areas back there. And what was supposed to happen was that the parliament in Kiev was supposed to rearrange the law and allow them to have elections and degree of regional autonomy. The last thing I'll say on this is simply that by calling them pro-Russian separatists, labels really matter. They're not pro-Russian separatists. They're anti-coup federalists. What do I mean by that? Well, are they pro-Russian? Well, to the degree that they rely on Russia, they're of Russian stock, yes, they're pro-Russian, but that's not the interesting aspect of this. The most interesting thing is that they resisted the coup in Kiev that the United States and the Western powers mounted on the 22nd of February, 2014. They saw that that coup was led largely by these proto-fascists, and they didn't want any part of it. First thing the coup leaders said, we're going to eliminate Russian as an official language. Second thing, we might join NATO. The separatists, so to speak, revolted against that and said, not in our neighborhood. Now, are they separatists in the sense that they'd like to separate and join Russia? Well, forget about that. Putin made it very clear from the very beginning, we're not going to have you guys. You work it out yourselves. We'll support you. And to the degree they have needed food and other supplies and some weaponry, I suppose, the Russians have supported these regionalists. So unless the United States says to Poroshenko, look, it's time for you to cooperate here. It's time for you to live up to your part of the agreement and get the government to recognize these regional aspirations. Unless that happens, and unless Poroshenko feels strong enough to tell his proto-fascists, look, the game is over, we're going to do a little peace rather than war, nothing's going to happen. So what's the impetus for this meeting? The US election. Now, when Hillary Clinton comes in, and the people that she's bringing with her, they've openly favored giving arms, offensive arms, to Ukraine. They've openly favored doing no-fly zones in Syria. These are acts of war, or at least the latter is, and the Russians in the interim between now, and not the election, but between now and when Hillary Clinton, if she does, takes power on the 20th of January, they're going to fix things so that they appear, or they will be, in the strongest possible position, both in Syria and in Ukraine. The Europeans, to their credit, are worried about that. And so they would like to do the political process again and give it another try. It's doomed, as I say, unless the US now, Barack Obama is who I'm talking about, and Poroshenko decide to stop what they've been doing and honor what they promised to do in the original Minsk Accords.
Now, Ray, you said that Poroshenko was on Washington's strings, so to speak. I'm assuming you are saying here that he's more or less a puppet of Washington. What did you mean by that? And elaborate on how Poroshenko is being controlled by Washington.
Well, he's extremely dependent on economic support from the IMF, which the U.S. pretty much controls. The country is a shambles. He needs all the help he can get from the United States. And the people who are running our policy toward the Ukraine see more merit in keeping the violence going. Why? Because the Russians will feel kind of nervous about what happens on their southern border. Doesn't make a lot of sense to people in America, but that doesn't matter because people in America are not informed on these things. They are incredibly malnourished on what's going on in places like Ukraine and Syria. Well, one last word on Ukraine. Sometimes the most palpable evidence of what happened comes when they have the post-negotiations interviews, the press conferences. I watched Merkel and Hollande, the Chancellor of Germany and the President of France. They were literally down in the mouth. They were trying to put lipstick on a pig. Nothing happened, and to see them circumlocute around the fact that nothing happened was really painful. I understood all of what Merkel said, most of what Hollande said, and it just was a kind of pitiable spectacle. I'm not surprised that Putin decided not to participate in that charade.
You were just in the region. You were on a mission with 20 other people, and you give us a sense of what you observed, where you went, what people are saying.
Well, we talked with everyday Russians and also some entrepreneurs and some teachers and nurses, and we were in Crimea. We were the first U.S. delegation in Crimea, even though we had no official status, and we were welcomed. It was just a big deal for them. One of our colleagues arranged to have a swim for friendship in the Black Sea. It went over wonderfully in the local press. We talked to people in Krasnodar, in southern Russia. We talked to people in St. Petersburg, Moscow, of course. It was a very refreshing 2 weeks. And of course, the Russians turned out to be people like us who would really like to have peace rather than war, and who really can't quite understand why their president, who has an 82, I say again, 82% approval rating, why he is made out to be the devil incarnate in the US press. They have suspicions about that. They do worry about that, what that means.
All right, Ray, I thank you so much for joining us, and hope to have you back sooner than later.
You're most welcome.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.